This is AMTV. Hello there everyone, and welcome to part 24 of this series looking at the history and impact of Doctor Who viewing figures. If you're joining us for the first time, a very warm welcome to you. We hope you stick around for future instalments and check out our previous episodes. We've covered the first 6 Doctors eras, which can be enjoyed individually, by season, or together as compilations. But for now, sit back, relax, and join me once again as we delve back into the wonderfully niche world of Doctor Who viewing figures. Our destination? Season 24. It's early 1987, and the Doctor Who production office has a crisis on its hands. After John Nathan Turner was instructed by the BBC higher-ups to produce the forthcoming Season 24, he was left without any scripts, a script editor, and most importantly, a new Doctor. The previous incarnation of the Time Lord, Colin Baker, had his time in the role cut mercilessly short by the powers that be, who believed that for the show to be a success once again, it needed a new Doctor. Refusing to take part in a regeneration sequence, JNT had to work fast to not only cast the 7th Doctor, but also amass together a season of stories to show them off to an eager fanbase. His choice was the Scotsman, Sylvester McCoy. Initially finding fame in the Ken Campbell Roadshow and children's programmes such as Vision On and Eureka, McCoy was a man of many talents that JNT believed would be perfectly suited to the role of the Doctor. In the story department, the new script editor in town was Andrew Cartmel, a relative newcomer to the industry, taking over from Eric Saywood, whose very public resignation had left a sour taste in the mouth of the producer. Cartmel wanted to reinvigorate the programme, and had big ideas that he wanted to set into motion, commissioning newer, younger writers whom he felt not only understood the show, but offered new and exciting ways to tell a story. With just 14 episodes allocated to the season, Cartmel and his team were able to craft 4 brand new adventures, all very different, and in different respects, all equally memorable. With the new Doctor set to pilot the TARDIS, and the scripts being locked in, Season 24 was ready to go. But as with the beginning of every new era, the question was asked, would the public take to this new Doctor? Would they enjoy the new stories and the various directions that they wished to head in? And perhaps most importantly, particularly for the BBC, would this new lease of life cause the viewing figures to shoot back up to the levels that Doctor Who had become oh so accustomed to? Or would they remain as low as they did the previous year, or even worse, decline even further? Let's dive right into Season 24, and find out whether the show's last chance saloon paid off. The first story from Season 24 is Time and the Rani. The TARDIS is forced down on the planet Lacursha by the Rani, where the Doctor regenerates into his 7th body. Masquerading as Mel, the Rani tricks the Doctor into helping her further her plans to take control of the universe. This story is comprised of 4 episodes, which began airing on the 7th of September, 1987, and concluded on the 28th of the same month. Here are the individual viewing figures for all 4 episodes, and I think it's fair to say that this is not the sort of comeback that the programme was hoping for. Despite the higher-ups' demand of a new Doctor, it seems relatively few new audience members were all that interested, as the opening episode only attracted 5.1 million viewers. This sort of figure echoes what happened during the Trial saga the previous year, and the following 3 episodes only continue to do so, as all of them fall below 5 million, attaining 4.2, 4.3, and 4.9 million viewers respectively. These are some of the lowest numbers that Doctor Who has ever pulled in during its time on air so far, and considering the series was seemingly now always one step away from cancellation, it's hardly reassuring. For the top 40 TV programmes, however, things are slightly more positive, in the sense that none of Time and the Rani's 4 installments dropped out of the top 100. Part 1 charted the highest at 71st, still a fair way from the top 40, but somewhat of a saving grace at this point. Part 3 slips 10 places lower to 81st, Part 2 further still at 85th, and Part 4 is the lowest charter, finishing up at 86th place. So even though Doctor Who managed to kick off its 24th season within the top 100, the ever-present distance from the top 40 makes that sort of honour seem ever more elusive. What exactly happened here then? After a change in Doctor, change in script editor and several other factors, why was Time and the Rani not able to bring about the ratings boost that the higher-ups, and indeed the production team, had hoped for? Well, before we address our regular factors, we must note the fact that Doctor Who was once again shifted around in the TV schedules. The series was to no longer occupy its traditional Saturday tea time slot, for it would now air on Monday evenings. The programme was no stranger to weekday airings. The entire Peter Davison era went out twice weekly to sustain success, so what was the difference here? Well, during the Davison years, The programme was airing either just before or at 7 PM against consistent competition, but competition it could often claim victory over. However, for season 24, Doctor Who would now air at 7:35 PM, the latest time the show had ever gone out in its history so far. This move prompted some complaints from parents whose younger ones could no longer watch the show due to clashes with after-school activities, or in some cases, had already gone to bed. However, the main problem with this new time slot was the competition shown over at ITV. For now, the Doctor would go directly up against the network's longest-running soap opera, Coronation Street, which had been on air since 1960. As with most soaps, Corrie would see peaks and troughs with its popularity over the years, but with a sensationalist rise in storylines hitting most soaps of the late 80s, the public was more interested as to what was happening on the cobbles than ever. Against Time and the Rani, ITV soap was easily able to attract more than double the Doctor's viewership week after week. BBC One controller Michael Grade defended this schedule change, claiming that with some of Britain's biggest names appearing this season, he was confident that it will make inroads into the viewership on Monday evenings. Sadly, in Time and the Rani's case, these hopes were disastrously unfounded. What about the promotional department, though? Was a lack of publicity another damning factor into the weak impact that the season opener had? I'd argue no, as there was a startling amount of publicity for Time and the Rani, just not all of it good. On the positive, a trailer was screened at a BBC press launch in mid-August, which showed clips from the first 3 stories of season 24, as well as highlighting several of the guest stars that were set to appear. A cut-down version of the trailer was later screened on BBC One to advertise the new run of adventures. In the print world, Doctor Who enjoyed some lavish colour promotion thanks to publications such as the Radio Times, who dedicated their back page spread to the upcoming season, and Sylvester McCoy was the subject of several interviews, as were his co-stars Bonnie Langford and the returning villainess, Kate O'Mara. All of this positive coverage seemed to occur before the broadcast of Time and the Rani, for as the serial hit the airwaves in September, that's when all of the negative comments came in. Many of the tabloids criticised the new Doctor, the story, and the series itself. Several cited the adventure as pantomime in tone, with the lead actors camping up their roles to the max. Within the fandom, several were critical of the programme, with even the Doctor Who Appreciation Society voicing their disdain at producer John Nathan Turner, with many blaming him for the show's supposed decline in quality. This continued the strained relationship JNT had with the fandom, as whilst he knew attending conventions and events was a great way to build that bridge, he was growing weary of the ever-constant scathing attacks on his work and his character. Meanwhile, the viewpoints of the general audience continued to flood in. A programme to show these opinions, points of view, showcased some comments from viewers regarding the serial. Some were enthusiastic, others were outraged. Nice to see that hasn't changed over the years. The new theme tune that accompanied the new titles also drew heavy criticism. Arranged by Kev McCulloch, the new theme had heavy synthesizer overtones that many believed removed the air of mystery from Ron Grainer and Delia Derbyshire's original. However, I couldn't disagree more. I feel this theme gives off a sense of excitement, wonder, a slight tinge of menace. It feels like a full package, and to this day, it remains my favourite iteration of the iconic theme. But perhaps the piece of publicity that was the most telling of how divisive the new Doctor and Adventure were was the appearance of Sylvester McCoy, Bonnie Langford, and John Nathan Turner on an edition of Open Air. Broadcast live one day after Time and the Rani concluded, the stars and producer endured the scathing comments made about their performances from the press and the disdain from viewers regarding the show's supposed descent into pantomime. The three take most of these on the chin, and some positive comments were made, which is a nice silver lining, but perhaps most reassuring was JNT confirming that there would indeed be a new season for 1988. So, at least viewers knew season 25 was locked in. Time and the Rani had a rocky ride of it, to say the least. From derision in the press to criticism from viewers, you could be led to believe that simply no one enjoyed the serial, or the new Doctor. But of course, this simply isn't true. Even back in 1987, there were those in the print world and on TV expressing their admiration and enjoyment of the season opener. And while Sylvester's Doctor was still finding his feet, there were those who enjoyed the clown-like antics of this impish new man. Regarding the story itself, it's often chided as being one of the weakest examples of Doctor Who that's ever been. And sure, there are moments that feel a tad bit panto, some elements that look a bit flimsy or unfinished, but honestly, for the most part, I find Time and the Rani a lot of fun to go back to. It's crystal clear that the cast are having the time of their lives making this show, particularly Kate O'Mara, who returns as the Rani. Having found success overseas in hit show Dynasty, Kate insisted that she would be more than happy to return to the muddy quarries of Doctor Who to record a return appearance. The story was written by Pip and Jane Baker, an established writing duo who had previously penned The Mark of the Rani and 5 episodes of The Trial of a Time Lord saga. And whilst many cite this as their weakest effort, you can hardly blame them for trying. Considering that when they wrote the serial, they still had Colin Baker in mind as the Doctor, as well as alterations being made at the request of new script editor Andrew Cartmel. The result may be a little over the top and a tad ridiculous in places, but Time of the Rani boasts some new and impressive special effects for the time, some wonderful scenes with Sylvester as the Seventh Doctor, and just a prevailing sense of fun and frivolity that provides some of the most entertaining Who of the 1980s. Highly recommend you give it a chance. Just switch your brain off and have a blast. Overall, this story attracted an average of 4.6 million viewers, a 0.3 drop from the previous story, that being the 14-part Trial of a Time Lord. This is hardly the average you want to clock in for a season opener, especially one that's introducing a brand new Doctor. This figure makes Time and the Rani the least viewed post-regeneration story for a new Doctor on our journey thus far. A disappointing sight to say the least. A new Doctor had proven to be event television for the audience, curious to see the new lead in action and how they'd adapt to the role. And whilst Part 1 had a small boost, it seems that intrigue was nowhere near at the levels it had once been amongst the general public. It may all seem like doom and gloom, but I can't stress enough how much fun Time and the Rani is. I appreciate that it may not be for everyone, but at a time when Doctor Who was constantly facing calls of cancellation, not just from the press but even in some corners of the fandom, the fact that this serial wasn't afraid to let its hair down and present a story filled to the brim with wacky ideas and set pieces, that's an admirable cause to take in my opinion. To join in the fun for yourself, you can read the Target book from 1987, or its forthcoming audio adaptation, which will be released in 2022. To watch it, you have the VHS release from 1995, the standalone DVD release from 2010, or the Season 24 collection set from 2021, which is exclusive to Blu-ray and features Time and the Rani alongside the 3 other stories from this run. Whether you're in it for the Rani's return or to see the 7th Doctor's first moments, Time and the Rani holds a lot of intrigue within its 4 episodes. It may not be the finest example of Doctor Who ever made, but it certainly captures the sense of spirit and optimism that the show had been championing for the last 24 years. Just don't let a tetrap get its tongue on you. That's just a little weird. The second story from Season 24 is Paradise Towers. Arriving in Paradise Towers, the Doctor and Mel find that the high-rise apartment block fails to live up to its name. Warring gangs battle it out in the corridors, murderous cleaning robots are on the prowl, and something sinister is hidden in the basement. This story is comprised of 4 episodes, which began airing on the 5th of October, 1987, and concluded on the 26th of the same month. Here are the individual viewing figures for all 4 episodes, and we seem to have improved slightly, but not to a high enough level for the show to be considered overtly successful in the ratings department. Whereas Time and the Rani had 3 episodes attract less than 5 million viewers, Paradise Towers manages to do the opposite, with parts 2, 3, and 4 breaking that barrier. Just. The peak viewership of 5.2 million with part 2 is a new high for season 24, but when compared to the past 23 seasons, it's a far cry from the show's past success. Part 1 stands out with only 4.5 million viewers tuning in, showing that despite all the efforts the production team were going to reinvigorate Doctor Who, they were largely going unchecked by the UK audience. However, looking over at the top 40 programmes, Doctor Who once again was able to avoid slipping into triple digits, with all 4 parts holding firm within the top 100. Part 3 ranks the highest at 79th, whilst parts 1 and 2 slip lower at 88th and 84th respectively, and part 4 comes the closest to slipping below 100th, as it settles in at 93rd place. Not bad for a show that was currently struggling to hold a viewership of over 5 million viewers. So, it seems that Paradise Towers couldn't provide a big enough boost to the show's vastly reduced viewership. But what factors were at play to result in this? It should come as no surprise that the competition over at ITV was arguably the dominating factor that contributed to Paradise Towers' low results. Coronation Street continued to demolish Doctor Who in the Monday night schedules, with the soap consistently getting well over 10 million viewers with each instalment. However, not to be outdone by immense odds, the promotional drive for Paradise Towers was consistent in both the print world and on TV. The focus of the promotion was the appearance of guest star Richard Briers, who was playing the leading villain, the Chief Caretaker. Briers was somewhat of a household name in British TV, his most notable role arguably being Tom Good, the leading man in popular 70s sitcom The Good Life. His appearance, along with the story, was promoted extensively on TV. Aside from the series launch trailers, Briers popped up in clips that were previewed on programmes such as Open Air, teasing his appearance, as well as the presence of the sinister cleaner robots. The Radio Times included several monochrome photos of Briers in character to help promote Part 1, and in the Today publication, an interview with the star was published, in which he discussed his role as the Chief Caretaker, and his thoughts on Doctor Who in general. One bit of odd publicity came from everyone's favourite dish rag, The Sun, in which they erroneously reported that the show had been axed completely. This came on the day of Part 1's broadcast, and was far from true, with producer John Nathan Turner having confirmed that the show would return in 1988 the previous week. Also circulating around the press at this time was the prospect of a big-budget Doctor Who movie. Unlike the cancellation rumour, JNT was all too happy to indulge this story, with him claiming that a film was being made by Coast to Coast and would be released in November 1988. Fair to say, this never came to fruition, and the idea of a Doctor Who movie would be a prospect that would last way into the 1990s. As Paradise Towers went to air, one key bit of positive feedback came from head of drama, Jonathan Powell. Writing to the production office, he described the serial as first-rate, and even suggested a future storyline involving the Daleks at Paradise Towers. Now, that's a sequel I'd be interested in seeing. The general reaction to the story was far more positive than with Time and the Rani, with audiences enjoying the atmospheric nature of the complex and the inhabitants within. However, one scene drew heavy complaints, namely the sequence in which Mel is threatened by the elderly Resis, who brandish knives towards her. Doctor Who was no stranger to knives or just violence generally, but wider events could have contributed to the complaints. The Hungerford massacre, in which 15 people were brutally murdered by a man with legally licensed weapons, had occurred in the August of 1987. From this event, a careful control was maintained regarding violence on British television. Despite being approved before transmission, Michael Grade found this scene to be a step too far and instructed John Nathan Turner to tone it down for overseas sales or repeat transmissions. From this, several shots were cut from the scene to avoid focus on the knives themselves. However, when issued to home video, the original scene was retained, and has done in every subsequent release. Paradise Towers stands as a shining example of the fresh new direction that script editor Andrew Cartmel wished to take the programme. The sets are atmospheric and dingy, the supporting Kangs are interesting and fleshed out, their presence and role within the towers told wonderfully through the dialogue and the set pieces. The Chief Caretaker and his cronies, whilst having a delightful air of camp, do a great job of providing the menace for the serial, as do the aforementioned Resis, their gleeful delight at capturing Mel sending shivers down the spine. The cleaning robots perhaps may have been more effective in lower lighting, but their inclusion is welcome nonetheless. And there's Pex. Who could forget Pex? Obviously fashioned as a pastiche, Howard Cook does a great job at making him both appear arrogant and cocky, but also sympathetic and likeable. And all of these elements were crafted by relative newcomer Stephen Wyatt. Commissioned by Andrew Cartmel, Stephen relished the chance to develop a script for the programme and was generally pleased with the finished result. It wouldn't be long before his name would appear in the opening credits again for a similarly dark and creepy tale. But more on that when we get there. Overall, this story attracted an average of 4.9 million viewers, a 0.3 increase from the previous story. It's a small improvement, but an improvement nonetheless. However, it is a shame that pulling in less than 5 million viewers, which was once a one-off, is now becoming worryingly more of a regular fixture for the programme. But people seem to take to Paradise Towers a little more than Time and the Rani, and we can only hope this positive trend continues as season 24 progresses on. Paradise Towers can arguably serve as another turning point in the programme's long history. It marks the first script that Andrew Cartmel was able to properly commission, catering to his vision for the programme and establishing new talent within the TV landscape. It marks a more atmospheric look for Doctor Who in terms of its storytelling, while still retaining a warmth and light touch to the proceedings. If you dare to explore the depths of Paradise Towers for yourself, you can read the Target book from 1988 or its audio adaptation from 2012. To watch it, you have the 1995 VHS release, the 2011 standalone DVD release, or via the Season 24 collection set, which is only available on Blu-ray. If the wacky antics of Time and the Rani weren't for you, then you may get a lot more from watching Paradise Towers. Sure, there's still some wacky moments to be had, but it's a wonderful adventure that is filled with danger, high stakes, and some truly standout moments. Take a trip yourself. Just watch out for those cleaners, otherwise you may end up as a meal for something sinister.
We're cleaners! Back to the lift! Wait, Doctor! Back!
The third and penultimate story from season 24 is Delta and the Bannermen. Joining a group of alien tourists for an unplanned stop at a 1950s holiday camp in Wales, The Doctor and Mel discover that one of the holidaymakers is being pursued by the ruthless Gavrok and his Bannermen, who are determined to make her race extinct. This story is comprised of 3 episodes, which began airing on the 2nd of November, 1987, and concluded on the 16th of the same month. Here are the individual viewing figures for all 3 episodes, and for the first time in Season 24, we have a story in which all of its episodes pulled in over 5 million viewers. Part 1 kicks things off with 5.3 million, the highest of the season so far. Part 2 drops slightly to 5.1, but then Part 3 brings things back up and provides the new top showing for Season 24 thus far, with 5.4 million sitting down to watch events conclude at the Shangri-La holiday camp. Despite hovering around 5 million being seen as a disappointment in the bigger picture, it is reassuring to see that the viewing figures are increasing, no matter how small the jump may be. In regards to the top 40 programs, as you may have expected, no episode is able to crack that top bracket. However, for the 3rd time this year, Doctor Who managed to avoid falling out of the top 100, with all 3 of Delta and the Bannerman's episodes finding a place within the chart, though not by much. Part 3 is the highest charter, at 87th, but Parts 1 and 2 came quite close to slipping to the next lower level, as they charted at 90th and 93rd place respectively. So, if Delta and the Bannermen currently represents the peak in Season 24's viewership, how come it wasn't able to push its numbers up even higher? ITV continued to dominate the Monday evening slot with Coronation Street, the ongoing events on the cobbles proving irresistible to the viewing public. I just want to take a moment to bring up the notion of recording programs. I've mentioned it before, but as the 1980s progressed, VCRs were becoming more of a household staple rather than a luxury novelty. And even though more viewers recorded programs year on year, Doctor Who included, these recorded viewings were not considered for the ratings. So, whilst I'm sure many fans tape Doctor Who whilst they or their families watch Corrie, it would be the soap that would climb higher in the ratings table. But whilst the TARDIS team's fight against the crew from the Rover's return seemed to grow ever more impossible, publicity and promotion for the series continued to remain consistent and plentiful. For Delta and the Bannermen, it was one of 3 Season 24 stories that was briefly showcased in the trailer for the programme. A week before the new season started, it was the subject of a 5-minute item on But First, This, which interviewed Sylvester McCoy, Bonnie Langford, and guest star Ken Dodd from the set of Delta and the Bannermen. The comedian's appearance was one of the most highly promoted items for Doctor Who that year, given his status as not just a household name, but a first-class entertainer. The Radio Times dedicated a colour article to Dodd's appearance, and trailers aired before transmission often showed clips featuring his Tollmaster character. The publicity and hype for his appearance perhaps implied he would feature throughout the story, when in fact he is mercilessly killed off during Part 1, much to the joy of some of the tabloid reviewers. The press reaction overall to Delta wasn't particularly positive, and some areas of fandom were much different. During an episode of BBC Two programme Did You See, which aired days after Delta concluded, former unofficial continuity advisor to the show, Ian Levine, and Doctor Who historian Jeremy Bentham were featured in interviews in which they criticised the programme, particularly how it was being handled by John Nathan Turner. The producer came under further fire from one of the leading Doctor Who fanzines, Doctor Who Bulletin, in which it claimed many of its readers and viewers overall wanted Michael Gray to fire John Nathan Turner and get a new producer for the programme. Whilst JNT had been in the producer's chair for 7 years by this point, already becoming the longest serving, he certainly was still trying to maintain the series' presence on air, even if he desperately wanted to move on to other projects himself. Delta and the Bannermen may be remembered for its very light-hearted and campy overtones, but by God is it a great time. Similar to Time and the Rani, which was widely criticised for feeling like an overblown pantomime, Delta embodies that same sense of fun and adventure. It has some great gags from many of the guest stars, and the setting of a rundown Welsh holiday camp I feel strangely works for this story. The whole 1950s theming works a treat in both the visuals and the music, and even if the main story can get lost within it sometimes, it's still a serial I can return to that's guaranteed to put a smile on my face. The writer for this story was Malcolm Cole, yet another newcomer to the programme brought on by Andrew Cartmel. Whilst it may have seemed quite out there and unusual for Doctor Who at this time, I find in retrospect Malcolm's work to wonderfully blend the fun, light-hearted nature of the setting and characters with the bleakness of the Bannermen and their ruthless leader, Gavrok. As mentioned, even though his time is brief, Ken Dodd is clearly relishing his small role with great gusto, and he too brings a smile to me, and many fans have enjoyed the story today. As does Stubby K, a Broadway legend who may not have much of an idea of what's going on, but the effort he gives the part makes it all the more endearing and enjoyable. The final supporting character I want to give praise to is Ray, a lovely Welsh girl who could have easily joined the TARDIS team as a travelling companion. Her performance in Delta is one of the story's highlights, and it's such a shame we haven't seen her return on TV. If you're not a fan of these sort of ultra light-hearted adventures, then perhaps Delta and the Bannermen isn't for you, but like all Who stories, I would always recommend sitting down to try it at least once. Overall, this story attracted an average of 5.3 million viewers, a 0.4 increase from the previous story. We finally cracked the 5 million mark with Season 24. Even though it may not have been by much, things definitely seem to be getting better little by little. Will we see the upward trend continue, and maybe even surpass 6 million with the final story of the season? We'll just have to wait and see. For all the calls of camp and pantomime that this story gets, Delta and the Bannermen arguably remains as the most fun and entertaining adventure that Season 24 has to offer. Given the right mood upon viewing, it can be one of the most heartwarming tales that Classic Who has, or one of the most laborious. It really depends on your tastes. To see where you stand on this divisive adventure, you can read the Target book from 1989, or its audio adaptation from 2017. To watch it, the story was released to VHS in the later years of the range, back in 2001, before making its way to DVD less than a decade later, via a standalone release from 2009. In 2021, it was included as part of the Season 24 collection set, where it can finally be enjoyed on the Blu-ray format. Doo-wop tunes, a Welsh holiday camp, an evil group of killers, and a green baby to boot, you really can't ask much more from Delta and the Bannermen, can you? It may not be to everyone's liking, just like any Doctor Who story, but if you want something that can evoke such simple joy and fun, then you hardly can go wrong with this serial. Perhaps on initial broadcast it wasn't what Doctor Who needed at that time, or more like what the audience didn't want at that time, but as it stands, it's a positive example of a show fighting to maintain its place on the air and having the best kind of fun whilst it's at it. Everyone hop aboard, and let's go back to the rock and roll years.
Actually, I think I may have gone a little too far.
The fourth and final story from Season 24 is Dragonfire. Arriving on Iceworld, the Doctor and Mel find themselves teaming up with Glitz and new friend Ace to find the fabled Dragonfire treasure. But the sinister Kane will stop at nothing to find it first. This story is comprised of 3 episodes, which began airing on the 23rd of November, 1987, and concluded on the 7th of December. Here are the individual viewing figures for all 3 episodes, and we've got back to being a bit all over the place. Dragonfire wasn't able to hold at least 5 million viewers across each of its episodes. However, Part 1 does bring in the highest viewership of Season 24, with 5.5 million viewers tuning in. Sadly, a chunk of them dropped away the following week, with bang on 5 million tuning in for Part 2, and further audience members continued to drop away by the time the story concluded, with just 4.7 million witnessing Mel's departure and Ace coming aboard the TARDIS. Not the strongest figures by any means, but if these ratings from Dragonfire and from Season 24 showcase anything, it's that despite the reduced audience, those who remained were loyal and continued to be captivated by the new Doctor's continued adventures. Crossing over to the top 40 programs chart, Dragonfire's placings mean that Season 24 as a whole was able to remain within the top 100 for the duration of its run. Part 1 charted the highest at 80th, and Parts 2 and 3 came very close to slipping into triple digits, coming in at 96th and 94th respectively. For Doctor Who to remain consistently within the top 100, despite a vastly reduced audience and immense competition, is certainly respectable at the very least. So, considering that Dragonfire was the finale for Season 24, why weren't more audience members tuning in to see how the 7th Doctor's first run of adventures rounded off? The main answer to that would be down to the poor scheduling against ITV. The network saw no reason to change their lineup in terms of what faced Doctor Who, considering that Coronation Street was trouncing it week after week with more than double the viewership. The move to Monday evenings wasn't destined for failure right from the outset, but after being placed against Corrie, that almost seemed to be the death knell. However, once again, publicity and promotion for the series remained as rampant as ever, although this time there were calls for celebrations. The BBC claimed that Dragonfire was the 150th story, which would start transmitting on the 23rd of November, the programme's 24th birthday. This is technically true if you number each of the trial segments from last season as individual stories. However, most consider the trial saga to be one long story, thus making Dragonfire the 147th story to be transmitted instead. But hey, who's counting? Clips from the serial were shown in trailers, and also in other programmes that were interviewing the show's stars. An edition of Going Live on the 14th of November had Sylvester McCoy join the regular hosts, where the infamous Part 1 cliffhanger was shown, but we'll talk more on that in just a moment. In the print world, various publications ran with the 150th story celebrations, and the Radio Times dedicated a lavish colour article for the occasion, giving a little backstory on each of the past 6 Doctors. The arrival of new companion Ace, played by Sophie Aldred, was picked up by most of the press, and she was set to appear on leading children's programme Blue Peter. However, this had to be called off due to her prior commitments to fellow children's show Corners, for which she'd recently started writing for as well. However, despite all the excitement around a new companion and the 150th story celebrations, one day before Part 1 was transmitted was when the Did You See segment, which heavily criticised the programme, went out on BBC Two. With high-profile fans and historians coming out against the show and its producer, it had the potential to shatter Dragonfire's chances in terms of attracting new viewers. How odd that Part 1 ended up attracting the peak of Season 24's viewership, with 5.5 million tuning in. Dragonfire did warrant some complaints during its broadcast, namely for a scene in Part 3, in which the villain Kane's face seemingly melts before the audience's eyes. It reminds me strongly of a similar scene from Raiders of the Lost Ark, but despite it being carried across that Kane was mostly made up of ice, some parents found it a little too much for 7:35 on a Monday evening. However, the most important bit of publicity to come during Dragonfire's time in the spotlight was a comment from head of drama Jonathan Powell, who on the 16th of December had confirmed that the future of Doctor Who is safe, and that he believed that the new leading man was doing a marvellous job. So for those who struggled to believe JNT's comments about Season 25 on open air back in September, it now was set in stone. Doctor Who wasn't cancelled and would be coming back. At least for now. Dragonfire is often cited to be the crowning jewel of Season 24, and for many onlookers, it's not hard to see why. It's a story filled with charm, menace, and a growing sense of adventure. We have Sophie Aldred bursting in as the new companion ace, a fiery teenager who isn't afraid to speak her mind, blow things up, and call others out for their misdeeds. In many respects, she was quite unlike any companion that had come before on Doctor Who, and it's no wonder that many writers from the revived series cite Ace as a huge inspiration for how modern-day characters are formed and portrayed. We also get a fantastic villain, the Icy Kane, who is played masterfully by Edward Peel. Stylised as some sort of quasi-Nazi-esque general, Peel delivers a performance that not only is memorable, but extremely impactful too. The way he manipulates those around him, only for them to meet their demise at his hand, is a horrific yet excellent piece of storytelling. One of those who fall before him is guest star Patricia Quinn, of Rocky Horror Picture Show fame, and while she gives a great performance, I wish they had given her even more to do. The author of this serial, Ian Briggs, was another newcomer to the programme, and someone who had been an avid fan of the show since the 1960s. With his knowledge of the Doctor's past and a love of sci-fi, his dialogue remains sharp and consistent, and the story beats and structure are fast-paced and engaging. We do have a returning character pop up, that being Sabalom Glitz, played once again by Tony Selby. Having appeared sporadically through the Trial of a Time Lord saga the previous year, it's a pleasant surprise to see him reappear, but Selby absolutely nails the character, that cockney, Del Boyish type charm coming through in spades. Whilst the story is memorable, it's not always for the best. Part 1's cliffhanger has been the subject of mockery and parody ever since it went out in 1987. We see the Doctor come to a cliff face, to which he decides to climb down, and then realising he doesn't know what to do or where to go next, creating a literal cliffhanger. And whilst it does look odd and certainly makes no sense, I'm sure had there been more money in the budget or more time in the episodes, that this scene could have had a bit more context and come off as a bit less jarring. However, Dragonfire also contains one of my favourite scenes from the McCoy era, that being Mel's departure from the TARDIS at the story's conclusion. Her decision to leave does come rather out of the blue, but the little moment her and the Doctor share in the TARDIS is extremely touching, McCoy getting a real chance to show the more melancholic and mysterious side of his take on the Time Lord. It's a lovely scene, and even if you can't believe that Mel would leave with Glitz of all people, we are left with a brand new companion to join the TARDIS. Someone who brings a youthful energy and presence, and one that would undergo the most radical character development of any classic Who companion. But more on that when we get there. Overall, this story attracted an average of 5.1 million viewers, a 0.2 drop from the previous story. It's a shame that the upward trend seen throughout Season 24 didn't continue right until the very end, but given all of the factors working against Doctor Who, at this point, to finish off with an average of 5 million is somewhat of a saving grace. They aren't impressive figures, even by 1987 standards, but it continued to showcase that the programme had a loyal following that was willing to stick around despite any changes that may occur along the way. Dragonfire is in many ways one of the more traditional, yet excitingly refreshing stories that came out of late 80s Who. The injection of new writing talent helps make Iceworld and its inhabitants feel detailed and intriguing, and even if the dragon mechanoid looks a bit naff nowadays, we can only imagine what could have been had the programme been given a stronger budget. But if you want to witness all these goings-on for yourself, you can read the Target book from 1989 or its audio adaptation from 2019. To watch it, you have the VHS release from 1993, or the DVD release from 2012, in which it was bundled with Season 25's The Happiness Patrol as part of the Ace Adventures box set. For Blu-ray, you have the Season 24 collection set, which was released in 2021. You may be in it for Ace's arrival, for Mel's departure, the return of Glitz, or just to see a cracking villain work out his malicious plans. Dragonfire feels familiar, yet new all at the same time. It's certainly a highlight from Season 24, and has so much on offer to grab your attention. Just make sure that if you're going to climb down any cliffs, that you actually have a plan to get out of it. So that's Season 24, the 4 stories that comprise it, and the ratings that they garnered. With the transmission of Part 3 of Dragonfire, Season 24 was brought to an end, concluding a 3-month run, comprised of 14 episodes across 4 stories. Now, let's have a look at the averages for this season. We can see that the winner is Delta and the Bannermen, which had 5.3 million viewers watching on average. Whilst it is good that Doctor Who was cracking the 5 million mark, it continues to cast a dark cloud over the series as a whole, considering that for several years, Doctor Who was gaining averages well over 5 million with every single adventure. The least viewed story of Season 24 is the opener, Time and the Rani, which had 4.6 million viewers on average. A result within the 4 million range sets off several alarm bells for sure, but considering it's only 0.7 million behind the winning story, it represents the reduced state Doctor Who was in terms of its appeal to the wider general public, and not just the dedicated fanbase. Now, as we always do, let's work out the overall average for this season. By combining the average ratings for each story, we can calculate that the average viewing figures for Season 24 of Doctor Who stands at around roughly 5 million viewers. This is a 0.1 increase from the previous season, which sure is an improvement in terms of the raw numbers, but to see such a small rise in what was meant to be yet another bold reinvention of the series is quite disappointing to see. And even though all 4 stories have viewing figures that are quite similar to one another, despite some sort of consistency, the result clearly shows a weakened presence in the wider world of TV programmes in the UK. When placed alongside the previous 23 seasons, the 7th Doctor's first run of adventures sadly charts as the second least viewed season of the programme thus far, only slightly ahead of Season 23, which remains at last place. The further we journey on, it is a crying shame to see so many seasons from the 1980s occupy these spots in the rankings. We can only hope that with Season 25, Doctor Who will finally be able to break free of the bottom 5, for which it posted new entries to over the last few years. Season 24, like the season before it, had quite a lot to take on and overcome. It not only had to introduce a brand new Doctor, but it had to introduce viewers to new kinds of stories, ones they weren't necessarily used to, all whilst trying to maintain its success and popularity amongst the viewing public. Now, did it achieve all of these aims? Arguably not. The scheduling against Coronation Street was a huge blow for the programme, immensely preventing it from attaining the viewership it deserved, and the constant attacks from the press and corners of the fandom probably didn't help either. However, when all is said and done, the production team were able to put together and transmit 4 stories that, if nothing else, all retain that wondrous sense of fun and adventure that Doctor Who has been able to do so well right from its inception all the way up until today. Whether it's the more traditional yet wacky events of Time and the Rani, the rundown complex of Paradise Towers, the fun and frivolity of Delta and the Bannermen, or the icy intrigue held by Dragonfire, Season 24 is not only one of the most varied seasons of Doctor Who, but it's also one of the most fun. And whilst at the time and for many years after it was the subject of derision, in recent years opinions seem to have shifted, with many more citing their appreciation for the season, its leading actors, and the stories themselves. It may all be a bit campy, but Season 24 is the perfect example of shut your brain off entertainment. If you're here for a good time, then it's going to keep you constantly smiling away from start to finish. Sylvester McCoy absolutely shines as the 7th Doctor in this season too. Sure, to start with, perhaps his characterisation comes across as a bit too comical, but when given very little direction, he played to his strengths, so I can't criticise him too harshly for that. But as the season progresses, you can already see glimmers of this more mysterious, darker Doctor, a being that is aware of the powers he holds and how he can use them to set plans into motion, long before his enemies, or even his friends, have clocked on. Andrew Cartmel, as script editor, had huge plans for the character that he wanted to set in motion, and we'll see more of that plan unfold over the next few years. But the primary aim had been achieved, that Doctor Who was safe and would return in the autumn of 1988 for its 25th run of stories. But how would the team celebrate and hype up the 25th anniversary? What did they have in store that would not only entertain existing viewers, but hopefully make great inroads into pulling audiences away from Coronation Street, right back to the adventures of the TARDIS team? You'll have to join me next time to find out. So those are the ratings details for Season 24. I hope you enjoyed this numerical look back at the inaugural year for the 7th Doctor, a time that was marred by criticism and low viewing figures, but also by light-hearted tales through space and time, with lots of fun and scares to be had along the way. If you want to watch more Doctor Who content, then I highly recommend that you check out the Review of Death podcast. Billy and Matt are wonderful hosts and creators, and every fortnight they talk about recent Who news and also give their thoughts on various stories throughout the programme's history. You can check the pod out on YouTube or at all the mainstream audio streaming sites. If you want to read more about Doctor Who and the making of it, then I highly recommend the Complete History series of books, which I used as reference for this video. If you want to keep up to date with this series, you can follow me on Twitter and Instagram, and if you want to see new episodes of the series early, then you can, by supporting us on Patreon or via my Ko-fi page. Please consider leaving a like, subscribing to the channel, and leaving your thoughts on Season 24 in the comments section below. I've been Adam Martyn from AMTV, and we'll see you next time for Season 25.